Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We're going to be starting shortly. I'll put my camera on there so you can see who I am. I think most of you know me anyway. Just give it a few more minutes. We've got people joining as we kind of speak, but we'll get cracking and in a minute or so. Thank you. Hello again, everybody, and thank you very much for joining our webinar this afternoon. We've got people still joining us, but we'll make a start because we want to keep to time. And we're clearly going to be getting into the content shortly. I'm joined by a couple of colleagues today. If we go to the next slide, please, Costa, that'd be great. Lovely. Well, you can clearly see who I am, Chris Booth from ITHealth. I'll introduce my esteemed colleagues in a second. Just before I do that, a couple of housekeeping points. We will have a few polls as we go through the session today. It'd be great if you could interact with that. We're going to try and keep the session as interactive as possible. And if you've got any questions, please pop them into the question panel. We'll either deal with them there and then, or we'll tackle them towards the end. And at the end of the session, as usual, there'll be an exit survey. If you do have time just to fill that in for us, that'd be great. It just helps us make sure we keep on point and we keep the content as appropriate and accurate as possible. Can I take time to introduce my colleagues now? Chris and Costa.
Afternoon.
Hi, gents. Hello. Do you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, Chris, shall I let you go first?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Chris Wallace from N3i.
Hi all, I'm Costa. I'm one of the cybersecurity consultants here at Sophos. And I guess a bit of background about me for those who don't know me. I used to work in the NHS for about 15 years, so work very closely with our public sector customers here at Sophos as well. So lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Thanks both. So I'm just going to just set the scene a little bit, talk a little bit about ITHealth. Again, I know a lot of you will know who we are. So go to the next slide, please, Costa. Thank you. So we've been working in the NHS for over 30 years now, and we work with a number of leading industry partners. We're going to be talking specifically around Sophos today, and a lot of you will know us more recently around our IT Health Assurance Dashboard. We see that all these things have a lot of synergy together. We're really trying to bring solutions to bear and integrate them, kind of glue them together to help us all protect what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is, look after patients. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep enhancing that. We're working with over 200 customers at any moment in time, and that's right across the kind of length and breadth of the country. More than happy to speak to anyone about any of the other areas that you see on the slide that's presented today, but clearly we want to focus in on the Sophos MDR solution that is kind of front and center. And next slide, please. Thanks, Costa. Our partnership with Sophos goes back a long way. It's in excess of 20 years now, and over that time we've worked on some very, very interesting large projects, the whole area around synchronized security. So whether it be what we're going to talk about later around managed detection and response, or whether we're talking around the firewalling side of things or endpoint protection, our team is very well versed with that. We've got many joint customers. We've got many case studies as well. We've actually been the healthcare partner of the year with Sophos for a 5-year period. That kind of award has now ended, but it takes nothing away from the commitment that Sophos have to the NHS marketplace. And in fact, they've been rebuilding their team locally, and having the likes of Costa around is great because it means he's got all of his NHS experience, deep engineering experience, plus all of his Sophos experience. So we do really enjoy working with our Sophos partner, yeah, we're really keen to share more about that with you today. So next slide, and over to you, Costa.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. And I think there is a slight delay from when I'm clicking next slide to when it's coming up from a presentation perspective, so apologies for that. So guys, just a very quick piece for me, just to almost set the scene from what we're seeing in the cybersecurity as the challenge from the NHS's perspective. I've got a couple of bullet points that I'll talk through, but equally there are 3 polls that I'll start, so it'd be good to see whether what we've picked up on collaborates or corroborates with what you guys are feeling as a challenge as well. So I guess maybe as the starting point, this one's pretty simple one across all industries, right? Cyber threats are accelerating in volume and sophistication. I don't think it needs to be too much drilled down or made the point of that threats are not the same as what they used to be. It's not a case of spray and pray. It's not a case of this piece of malware we can just download and it will cause a load of issues in our environment. We see a lot more targeted attacks. And I think to the second bullet point that's there around how many of these attacks lead to outright data encryption, but also exfiltration, is generally where we're seeing the trends continue and continue. So I think we all very much get caught up on the WannaCry happened and it encrypted and it asked for Bitcoin. You know, that was a moon ago now, and still very much lives within something that I battled with when I was in the NHS. But I think the point that we like to make here is that it hasn't gone away, and equally the importance around these types of threats, just because there hasn't been a national one in terms of the likes of WannaCry, shouldn't take away the importance when we focus on it. So I think maybe just to split this up a little bit, obviously when we talk about sophisticated threats, we also have to think about the things that are not detected from a protection standpoint, whether that's on your endpoint, whether that's at your email gateway, whether that's at your firewall or any other cybersecurity solution that you're using. So I got a bit of a question here, and all being well, that should start sharing a poll, which is, how do you guys hunt for attacks that have not yet generated an alert? And I'll give that a couple of minutes, or well, not a couple of minutes, about 30 seconds, just for everybody to have a consideration around what they do. Do you rely on the CSOC? Have you got your own team of threat hunters? Do you have Sophos MDR already, in which case, great. Or is there another piece there? Are you leaning on a third-party vendor? Are you leaning on a specific piece of technology? Yeah, that would be really good just to get your feedback then. And then we will move on to the next point for a discussion point of view. So we've got about 60–70% of you have voted so far. Give it another few seconds for anybody else who wants to have an input. Cool. Right, let's close that poll and let's share the results of that. So we've got 69% of you have the CSOC as your primary way of hunting for attacks that you've had no detections or alerts from. Good to see the confidence in the CSOC there. 19% of you have got your own threat hunters, which again, really encouraging to see. I know trying to get dedicated cyber heads and tooling in the NHS has always been a difficult one, so nice to see that some of you are doing that. And I guess the 13% of you that have put other, feel free to use the Q&A to put this in, but it'd be interesting to see what you guys are doing in that other space, so that we can maybe share some learnings with the wider audience that are on the call, and we can come back to the Q&A as and when we're getting towards the end of the webinar as well. So thank you all for that. All being well, that should go back to my screen, and Chris, give me a nudge if it hasn't. So we'll go on to the next point. A lot of you obviously there have commented on the fact that the CSOC is responsible for the threat hunting piece. But I guess the other side of this is, if there is a threat hunting scenario, what happens from your perspective? And I guess from what we're seeing is that sometimes the notification comes through, sometimes it's quite quick, sometimes it might come through maybe a few days after the event has happened. But effectively, I guess the onus or the responsibility seems to come back to the local teams that we've been speaking to. And I think there that when there is these modern day threats and state actors, 24/7 coverage isn't something that all NHS trusts have, and not everybody responds to those care certs in that timely manner. So hence it's listed as one of these cyber challenges. But again, useful to understand from your perspective how long it generally takes for the CSOC to get involved and notify you about something. Again, it's all well and good us hearing it from feedback when we have calls with our customers, but always good to understand on our webinar. How long do you think the CSOC generally takes to notify you? 30 minutes, a couple of hours, more than 12 hours? Again, just be good to understand where that's happening for yourselves. It seemed like a good mix of voters this time round. So 2 to 12 hours currently seems to be the average. Again, I'll leave that for a few more seconds whilst everybody takes a vote. Outstanding. Right, I'll probably pause there. I think that's where everybody else kind of tailed off the voting there. So let's close that one, share the results. I guess the thing that really stands out for this here, 7% of those alerts are in less than 30 minutes. So, you know, we know that things can escalate quite quickly. So the 30-minute time period there, not ideal, I guess. But then for the majority there, 2 to 12 hours, it seems to be the most given response time for the CSOC. And then we've got a few of you there that fall into that more than 12 hours. So yeah, really, really valuable feedback, guys. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I guess maybe as a final point on my screen here, one of the biggest challenges I know that I uncovered when I was in the NHS was certainly around the agenda for change bandings and being able to apply those to very dedicated security professionals. Again, this isn't just an NHS or public sector problem. There's a big gap in cybersecurity skill sets of about 350% in the last 10 years. And obviously in this case where we know junior doctors and similar have gone on strike for pay rises and salaries haven't quite continued with inflation, to hire a dedicated cybersecurity expert who's an experienced cybersecurity expert can definitely be something of a challenge for yourselves. But I think, again, this is probably a great opportunity to have that final poll here, which is really when the CSOC is informing you guys, who is generally handling the threat on the piece that has given you that information. So is it the CSOC themselves? Are you handling it all internally? Or again, is there another option there? Do you already leverage Sophos? Do you already leverage another incident response provider or retainer or similar? So I'll just allow that to tick up. I think the vast majority here are all saying that you do it locally, bar 6% at the moment that have voted that you use outsource. So none of you are using MDR. I'll put a ... yet there, hopefully. And nobody is relying on the central team to provide those response actions. But let's close that poll, share those results just to have that final bit of conversation. Again, really useful for us to understand that, yeah, this is exactly what we're seeing. Everybody takes on those locally response actions. But again, for those, the 6% other, if you want to feedback how you guys are dealing with the things that come from the CSOC with that other, is it a third party? Is it another NHS trust or similar? Be really, really good to understand that. So thank you. Right. Thank you very much for allowing me just to set the scene to begin with. I'm going to hand you back over to Chris and Chris just to really talk about the other Chris's challenges that he has discovered whilst he has been working at N3i. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Costa. That was really good. And thanks everybody for joining in the poll. Thank you very much, Chris Wallace, for joining us today. And we're just going to kind of have a bit of a Q&A session really and talk through some of the areas that Chris and the team have been finding with regards to the use of the Sophos MDR solution. So Chris, could you introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your roles and responsibilities, size of the team, etc. N3i?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Within N3i, I'm the head of infrastructure. Cybersecurity fits within the remit of infrastructure within our business model. We're a managed IT service provider. We manage around 5,500 GP and ICB devices in the Humber and surrounding area. We have a relatively small team of staff. So we've got 7 staff that cover that in infrastructure. but we don't actually have anybody dedicated to a cybersecurity role. It's sort of all man's hands at the pump whenever anything goes wrong, and it's sort of a best endeavours to investigate problems and things like that. So it's always provided us with a problem, especially in the growing emphasis that's on cybersecurity within all the NHS standards, and then the external standards such as Cyber Essentials and things like that.
Okay, great, thank you. And just thinking about prior to the adoption of the MDR service, what could you articulate what the challenges were that you were facing within the team and the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge is resource and the right skill set, really. Due to the small size of the team and the fact that we don't have anybody dedicated for that role, the amount of alerts produced from various different systems can overwhelm the team with information. An investigation leads you down rabbit holes. You know, you can spend hours, if not days, looking at an incident, which is probably 99% of the time a false positive or something quite benign. But you've lost that time in engineering, and when you've got other aspects of the role to support, such as making sure that you keep the infrastructure up and running and making your daily changes, you know, it is a massive challenge, really.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And you've kind of articulated some of the next kind of question I got, but in terms of the reasons for the MDR service being applicable to you, can you kind of share with us how you saw that in relation to the national CSOC and what that provides?
So, I mean, the national CSOC is a great alerting and detection system, but that's what it is. It alerts and detects. It informs you that you've got a problem, and as Costa's poll's shown, you know, the local team has to deal with the cleanup remediation work. Again, without dedicated staff, that adds another burden to the already growing BAU that you might be undergoing. Also, some of the CSOC stuff comes in, it can be a day or two after the event, which can make it very difficult to investigate, especially in the past where we've had firewall logs set at quite short retentions due to the size of them and the amount of traffic we've got flowing. You know, those logs might have already been overwritten by this time the CSOC informed us that there was a problem. So actually root causing that and tracing it back becomes impossible at that point. It's just, I mean, MDR provides a great resource for actually dealing with the issue rather than just alerting us to it. You know, we see it as an extension of the existing team.
Okay, great. So, I mean, I know that you've been using Sophos on the endpoint for some years prior to this. Did you do any, or did you look at the market in terms of what vendors provide or these solutions are available, and what were your decisions for the choice to go down the MDR route with Sophos?
Yeah, I mean, I've been using Sophos in various different senses for at least 10 years. You know, we started on the on-prem system. We moved to Central when it was released with yourself, and we've seen some great improvements to the Central platform as it's been developed and improved, you know, such as InterceptX when it was introduced in the Threat Analysis Center. So that's been really good. I mean, looking at the marketplace, yeah, I mean, we did our due diligence across the marketplace, looking at what was out there. And then due to our existing good relationships with yourselves and with other Sophos colleagues that we've built up over the years, you know, it makes it quite a nice fit for us. And obviously, you know, you have to do the due diligence and make sure that it's cost effective and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you were on the short list from the very start, really.
That's good to know, and I think from our point of view at ITHealth, that's kind of testament to when we engage in you know, with our customers in terms of it not just being about providing a product, but actually providing a service, and then obviously this adds onto the top of that. So that's good to know. In terms of benefits that you could articulate to today's audience, can you kind of share some of those with us in terms of any particular key ones that stand out?
I mean, the biggest benefit I'd say for for us from an organisational point of view is it's 24/7, 365 days, coverage. So it gives you that additional reassurance that systems are being monitored, that actions will be taken if anything's it will be investigated, and if found to be a real threat, then actions will be taken. Our model, we always have staff on call and things like that, but there's the delay in getting hold of those people. There's a lag between them looking at it, because being on call doesn't necessarily mean somebody sat there watching a console all night. So there's a lag there that obviously malicious actors can take advantage of, and that's what MDR really reduces for us. It's that time to identification is reduced because they're doing that 24/7 monitoring for us. The other aspects of the service would be, we see them as more of a collaboration service. So we work with Sophos to do investigations sometimes, even where there isn't things being identified within Sophos MDR. So where MDE has found something, and even maybe CSOC's even notified us of it, we can go back to Sophos and say, can you please have a look through the logs? Did Sophos see anything at this point? And try and understand what the differences is and what else could be done about that. Another brilliant benefit of the system is it's human-led threat hunting. So, I mean, we did sort of ad hoc threat hunting as and when we thought we might have a problem, or where there's something that's particularly interesting in the news that we might be concerned of or something. But we definitely don't do it on a regular, or we didn't do it on a regular basis. And that, again, that's another gap that MDR has filled for us. And it's just, it eases the pressure on the team, and we also gain that two-way relationship where we're learning from Sophos as well.
Yeah, no, that's all really good. I think the one thing that in the conversations we had and I've had with other organisations is that whole piece about having peace of mind, knowing it's a safe pair of hands, all those kind of different analogy we could use, but the fact that when everybody else is in bed and something happens, then that somebody's going to be there to be dealing with these things straight away. So that's a real good peace of mind. So just thinking about they're kind of some of the benefits. I just kind of wanted to pick a little bit more in terms of things like how you think it may be helping you to understand the level of risk reduction or improved assurance. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, since we've introduced MDR, it's allowed us to reduce risks associated with data exfiltration and malicious code execution, because we've got more assurance that the MDR product's there and it's tracking alerts and investigating on 24/7. So we've been able to reduce those on the risk register. As the current dwell time on networks is around 7 days at the moment, again, the MDR service gives us assurance or heightens the chances that the Sophos MDR platform and its threat hunters are actually detect something within that 7 days before they move to encrypt or extract or move data out of the networks. So again, it's improved assurance that we don't have malicious activity within the network and data isn't being exfiltrated, which is a growing concern given there seems to be a move away from ransomware to just stealing the data and selling it on the darknet. When you've been ransomware because people's computers start going pop and your service desk goes mental. But you don't know if your data has been stolen sometimes, especially with some of these cases. And the last benefit that I wanted to add would be sort of disaster recovery. So we've sort of de-risk that to a certain extent because we have that relationship with Sophos, because we have that incident investigation policy within the contract. If anything does go wrong, it's not just on my team to fix it and bring everything back up. We have skilled cyber specialists that can come in and tell us, do we need to wipe everything and start again? Can we recover it safely? And then help us monitor that to make sure that there's no further intrusions after or any legacy ways into the systems. So again, I think that's a brilliant advantage of the system.
Yeah, yeah. I did like the way in which you kind of said that it's not just about managing the threats that are potentially coming to you that you're aware of, but also the ability to say, right, well, we know about this from that's hit somewhere else, and actually, how does that affect us? Or you're notified by a third party, CSOC or whoever, and actually you can then validate that and say, no, that doesn't affect us, or it does. So I think that's that kind of two-way thing, I think is really important. And the last thing really is, you know, we need to, they're all great things, but it's also important to understand what any barriers might be, or barriers that you face in terms of the decision or the adoption, how you kind of overcame those.
Well, while I work for N3i at the moment, I've worked in the NHS for 20 years providing health services. So the underlying issue has always been finance. So making sure that you can, you know, obtain the monies to buy the products. Now, unfortunately, the products aren't cheap, but when you actually do a cost benefit analysis and then also a cost of standing up your own service, some of these outsourced services look absolutely, you know, bargain price. So, you know, you're looking at, you know, in the region of $1 million plus to stand up your own CSOC 24/7. That's assuming you can get people with an adequate skill set to come and work for you. You know, the Humber area isn't that attractive to people wanting to move around the country. So, you know, it's difficult to attract that type of talent and then retain it. Like Costa said, you know, there's been lots of issues with pay increases and things. So, you know, it's not just about getting it, it's retaining it. So when we did the cost analysis and looked at the marketplace, Sophos, as always, has always come out very financially beneficial to us. You know, it fits within our cost envelope. When you present the cost to the director of finance, you know, we can spend 100 grand a year on this, or we can spend £1 million doing it ourselves. You know, it's virtually a no-brainer in some regards. And again, because we've got that collaborative relationship, I do feel like it's more of an extension of the team rather than just an outsourced service that you don't really hear anything from.
Yeah, and I think you make a very important point there. I mean, we've worked as ITHealth, we've worked very hard with the Sophos team to come up with the right commercial model to make it affordable in our understanding of what some solutions look like. One of the things that we were very keen to ensure we could do is provide pricing over an agreed period, let's say 3 years, as an argument's sake, that was fixed. So there's no kind of surprises. It's not a case of, well, you know, we're concerned about how much data is going to be ingested and therefore the price might then change. This is a, you know, a fixed price that we could agree with you and others, and therefore that's it. You know what your costs are for 3 years for this entire service, which is, I think, it's really important. Obviously, in times when things are fluid and changing all the time, so you've got that kind of locked in at the, you know, an agreed price, affordable was good. Okay. Is there any final comments you want to share with us, Chris, before we hand back to Costa?
I think it's just something that IT departments now need to consider as a basic budget line now. You know, it's the cyber defences and stuff need to be in place, and even with the CSOC service, even if you don't want MDR, sorry, you know, Sophos MDR can work off MDE as well. So it's interesting to know that it has multiple inputs. We've onboarded all of our firewalls as well. So we don't have Sophos firewalls, but we're redirecting all of our syslogs to it. So again, we're getting that boundary information to make sure that data is not leaving the network. So again, it's just all about de-risking the issues at a cost-effective point, really.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I know that Costa will touch on that ability to ingest content and data from various data sources. So that's been great. Thank you very much, Chris. We haven't had any questions come in yet, but if there are any questions anybody's got on kind of what we've talked about so far, please put them in the box and we'll get on to the end. Right, over to you, Costa. Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Can I just double check you can see my screen again, guys?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, yeah, I think, well, Chris has stolen a lot of my own thunder, my own talk track there. So great to hear that reinforced and to hear how he's getting on with the MDR service. But maybe just want to take a step back, give you a bit of industry insight. I'm not one for doom and gloom. I don't think that's particularly useful in this day and age. We all know about the bad stuff that's happening out there, but I think sometimes it's just good to review them from a 10,000-foot view to understand how that could potentially affect us. So bit of industry insight here from what we deem internally as the early warning system. So at Sophos, we obviously have a lot of telemetry that comes from a lot of our customers. So got about 570,000 customers across our endpoint, our email, our firewall, our mobile security products. And they all obviously create high level, medium level, low level severity detections and malicious activity alert. Now, just as a point of note, by the way, this is a best endeavors service. This isn't something from an MDR monitoring service that we have. But what we do is where we have got the telemetry coming through that is showing a customer is potentially genuinely under attack. And again, this is best endeavors. It's not proactive in this particular case. What we try and do is we try and reach out to customers. But this is also something that we have some stats on that I think are particularly useful when we have these types of conversations. Everything from a telemetry perspective, by the way, isn't new to a Sophos customer. They've all got it in their threat analysis center, in their events, their alerts. But I think it's just good to maybe just take a step back and have a look at, in the last 30 days, what we've actually seen in the NHS. So 20 customers actually flagged in the NHS in the early warning system. And you can see there's a big chunk of those detections being focused on CryptoGuard and ransomware alerts. But maybe just taking that out, as I don't want to call it an anomaly, but let's maybe just focus on some of the other detections that we've seen that made us have these detections come to the top of the pile for our attention, as it were. I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with the tool PSExec. And that's something that we see time and time again being leveraged by adversaries in people's networks, because generally speaking, it's a tool that people have historically used to make their own lives easier as an IT admin. They can do remote terminals to other servers, they can kill processes, and hence you can see there PUA PSExec is at the top of that 6%, and then if you got on the opposite side of that circle, the pie chart, you've got REMCOM shell, but also PUA PS kill. Where those are processes that are being killed using these tools. And I guess the point that we're trying to make here is that it's not always about outwardly malicious files or signatures or links that we're seeing here. A lot of this activity actually stems from, as you can see from those squares on the left-hand side, things like exploited vulnerabilities, or in worst cases now, the actual compromised credentials. And those compromised credentials, by the way, come under a number of different flavors, whether it's somebody clicking on a phishing link and sticking in their details, whether it's an adversary who's got a keylogger on a machine. The idea is that they're taking somebody's privileged account and then they're using them to try and work their way laterally across a network. So some interesting stats, and I think if I were to maybe impart some guidance from any of this, if you guys go into your Sophos Central instance, there is the reports section, there is a malware and PUAs report. Please just go and have a look through that, maybe export it to CSV, filter out some of the low-level stuff like the malware blocks on websites, and go and have a look at some of the more serious detections, and just make sure that you've not missed anything that could be an indicator of compromise there. But I do want to take a step back a second. Chris talked about data exfiltration being a really big thing, and it has obviously continued to increase from our visibility point of view. Now, these stats here are not Sophos stats. They're actually coming from Hackmageddon. These are the top data breaches that consumed, or should I say, overwent over 1 million records being stolen in the industries that you can see. So the numbers are relatively low compared to the total breaches, but I think it's quite good here to just take a step back and go, well, actually, in the human health and social work and in the administrative and support services or other public sector areas, there has been a large amount of public sector breaches that have led to over 1 million records being stolen, contributing to the 2.9, nearly 3 billion records that were stolen in total over 2023. But just notice the types of attacks that were actually there. Malware is still high up there, but actually the big ones there, account takeover, vulnerabilities that are being taken advantage of, and actually unknown. Unknown is probably the biggest one for everybody because they've not been able to work out what happened. They've not been able to do a root cause. They've not had teams to be able to help them through this. And so therefore they've had to mark down their breach as an unknown instance. But to another point that Chris was talking about there, throughout the years, we have genuinely seen the dwell time for adversaries come down. They used to sit in an environment, take their time, scope everything out, but as tools have gotten better, EDR and XDR tools being a primer for those, as behavioral-based defenses, whether it's InterceptX or otherwise, have increased their capabilities, especially in the outright ransomware protection capabilities. We've seen people want to get in and get out as quickly as possible. And so as you can see here, we've gone to pretty much half of the dwell time that we saw, but only a couple of years ago. And I'm not one to sit and talk and bang on about the AI piece here, but as we can probably appreciate with the depth of ChatGPT's capabilities and all the other natural language engine and large language model training pieces that are coming out of that, I expect that this dwell time will only come down further and further as there is a lowered barrier to get into creating malware, creating these packages, because they can just request what they want from a malicious version of ChatGPT and crack on and try and deploy those to the environments that they're targeting. So really, really crucial here when we think about dwell time, that when we're thinking about extended detection response, who's monitoring it, how often are they monitoring it? And again, to Chris Wallace's point here, is it being done 24/7? Because let's be real about life, nobody really attacks during the core hours when it will be noticed. They'll come in, they'll sit, and they'll wait for that opportune time when they know nobody's active in the environment at that time. So hopefully just some useful insights to begin with. And I think I'll probably just take a little bit of a tangent here now, because a lot of times we get caught up in the Sophos MDR being the 24/7 service that exists, and that of course we would want everybody to be signed up to get the best level of protection possible. But if you're sat here thinking, not ready for an MDR conversation, or maybe I need to know what other security services are out there, if you're an existing Sophos customer or not, these three services are really quite appropriate to be made aware of. So the first one that you can see in that top left-hand corner, have I been attacked? Sophos compromise assessment. This is, like I say, available to everyone, and this gets you this access to the same team of incident responders that we have on our MDR and rapid response service. But instead of doing a full-blown IR response over 45 days, you would effectively just have us look at a subset of machines that you believe to be compromised, so that we can tell you, yes, true compromise. No, actually, it's not a true compromise, and here's some remediation steps and everything there in between. But what we actually see a big transition from is that those who have took a Sophos compromise assessment and found they've actually genuinely been breached, they've very quickly moved over to the full rapid response incident response team. And again, as a bit of a reminder, these two tiers here are not proactive, they're reactive. So these guys are being brought in at a time when you are not sure, or you need some help getting out of a house being on fire, for want of a better term. And this is where we provide these reactive services for those that aren't on MDR. But just as a point about the rapid response service here, if you are in the point where you need to call in some incident response, if you do take the Sophos rapid response service out, this is for 45 days. It's a fixed fee pricing model, by the way. And the idea is that even if we deal with a threat within the first 10, 20 days, we then continue to monitor the estate for the remainder of that period of time, of that 45 days. We know lightning strikes more than twice when it comes to an exploit or an account that's been taken advantage of. So we want to make sure that you're there so that you can combat those threats if they do reoccur. And as a side note, by the way, there is also the option of an incident response retainer if you wanted to have this, so that you know within a scope of 4 hours you can have our team engaged. But again, I'll make the point here, this is very much a reactive piece as opposed to the proactive that a 24/7 SOC service would cover. And we'll talk a little bit more about MDR in a moment, but again, I like to maybe try and take a slightly different tangent around this rather than just tell you about everything that's great to do with the Sophos MDR service. I actually like people to maybe sit back and consider what is a definition of a security operations center. It's very quick and easy to assume that it's just somebody who's going to be doing some alert monitoring and responding to those threats appropriately, whether it's living off the back of a SIEM or any other event management platform. But to me, the true anatomy of a SOC is actually broken up into a large amount of segments. Now, don't get me wrong, by the way, I'm not going to talk through all of these, but I also think that coming back to Chris Wallace's point around building your own team it's not just a case of employing somebody to sit and have a look through and triage those alerts. There's a lot of other things that we should be considering when we think about how a service like a SOC, like an MDR service, does actually work. But let's take the core functionalities here. Threat intelligence is a really, really big one, right? How do you know what you're looking at? How do you know what you're looking for? And how do you determine whether that's something that's a false positive, true positive, or something gray in between? How do you translate that into threat hunting to go and proactively look? The poll that we had said the majority rely on the CSOC for that. So how do we determine what's unique in our environment? Have we got an old legacy piece of infrastructure or software? How do we know that we're proactively having exploits of that threat hunted for, as it were? If we get over to the point all the way on the right-hand side of incident response, how do we then learn from those? Are we actually capable of doing the incident response ourselves? Is it something that we have a team of people on standby for? And if we're taking that incident response as a learning piece, how does that feedback back into the threat intel and back into the threat hunting? Like I say, there's a lot of moving parts that we should consider around a SOC. And actually, if you just think about this if this was a circle, a less virtuous circle, there's a lot of feedback loops that a security operations center goes through. And if you just think about this holistically, each of these in a true SOC would be a separate division, separate teams, all who are focused on the aspect that they're looking to deliver. So if we think from an incident response perspective, we'd have the people who are battle hardened, they know what to do, they know how to put a fire out, and they also know what they would need to prevent that again from happening in the future. So that goes back into automation streams, that goes back into the threat hunting teams so that we can look for it proactively moving forwards. But equally, how do you have that being tested? If you are running your own SOC over 10,000 endpoints, for example, how do you validate whether something is actually what you found legitimate or not? That all very much, to me, falls into the very big cycle of a SOC and its core operations here. So just maybe think about when you're thinking of a SOC service, an MDR service, there's a lot more to it than people just sat having a look at your telemetry and responding to alerts. But I guess on that, let's flip this over to the way that Chris was talking about it as an extension of his team. So I will reference this as the MDR piece. So this is an example overview of our operations and our core teams in the MDR space. So just so that you know, this is a 24/7 service, just so that you're reminded, based around the world. So good few hundred people who are working throughout all these teams. But these are the resources that you would effectively have access to as an extension of your team. So coming again back to Chris's point around how much it would take to stand up your own team to do this versus outsourcing this to an MDR service, the value here is that you get on the left-hand side access to 3 different tiers of threat analysts. And to the point, these threat analysts aren't just there to respond to your data. You can open cases with them to investigate, i.e. you can email in, you can pick up the phone, you can effectively pass the ball back over to their court so they can do the heavy lifting for you when something comes in that you're not sure about from a cyber security perspective. On the right-hand side, this actually falls in, you notice that hopefully the colors match from the previous slide, that these are the teams that do all the heavy lifting so that our analysts aren't wasting their time trying to trawl through the false positives and retune all of those detections. These are the dedicated teams behind the scenes that are making sure that the detection for a PowerShell execution 3 years ago isn't still the same detection. Actually, it's been fine-tuned based on what we've seen in the field for everybody else. But let's maybe put some examples here. And I'm going to use a really, really simple example here. And we're going to use just a spear phishing one. So let's just imagine there's an email that comes through, spear phishing link, targeted, or maybe it's a spray and pray and it's gone to a lot of people. There's a package that gets downloaded, there's a malicious file execution that happens, and there's a few other things that happens on that machine, from process injection, scheduled task, etc. Now, you'll forgive the quite blasé timescale then of when the care cert might come through, when you might get notification from the CSOC. It might be earlier, it might be later. Obviously, it depends on the point of where that has been detected by the CSOC for your notification if you haven't picked up on it on your own telemetry yourself. So flip that into what that might look like for yourself as a local team responsibility. We all saw the poll there that said, I think 96% of you said that the responsibility for dealing with these threats comes back to you. So you may have to isolate the machine. You might need to go and find it and get rid of the malicious files, the scheduled task. And if we go over to the next piece, you might then have to do the root cause analysis to make sure that this hasn't affected anybody else before putting in some further mitigations moving forwards. But let's turn this on its head. What if there was the Sophos MDR service involved? And let's just say we were using the Sophos endpoint as the primary detection. Well, actually, all of the next steps are pretty much the same, except that the MDR service would have done the heavy lifting here. So at this point, if something's happened in the environment, it's not a case of sitting back and saying, how do I progress this next? The MDR team are the one that do the investigation for you. The MDR team, if you've authorized them to do so, are responsible for cleaning up the files, removing the scheduled tasks, isolating the machine if we need to. And then, as you can see, if it goes up to the point of an incident, i.e. deemed as a true active adversary in the network, we're also then able to provide via the MDR complete tier the full root cause analysis so that we understand where it came from and how to mitigate that moving forwards. And all you're left with as a customer is the remediation guidance. Go and block that domain if you've got control over your emails. I know NHSNet obviously happens at a government level, but then at the other side, there might be that you need to reset local user accounts or similar. That's a lot smaller from a responsibility perspective than you would have to do if you were managing this end-to-end for yourself. And I guess just for context here, speaking from experience with a couple of my NHS MDR customers, you may then receive a care cert to say something's happened, but all being well, the Sophos MDR team have handled that long before we've needed to get the CSOC involved. So really simple example here, and I hope it's useful just to impart that. I'll break down just some of the further response capabilities that we've got listed here. I'm not going to go into war and peace about these. If you notice on the left-hand side versus the right, we've got the two different service tiers of MDR, just so that you know what we'd be responsible for based on those tiers. But the one on the left-hand side, I think for most people really does cover what you need to happen during a threat being detected and what you would want to do from a response capability. So for full transparency here, the MDR team would be able to isolate the machine for you. They would be able to terminate something that's running on that device, force disconnects of local users or remote users on those, and obviously then do all the cleanup that we've just talked about. I hope all of that makes sense thus far, and yeah, again, appreciate if there's any questions, feel free to sling them in and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. But maybe I just want to add a bit further guidance here, especially when it comes to what Chris was mentioning around if there are care certs that come around other things. There is the big portion of this that we deem as threat hunting. So what I've just described is very much to that point an event and monitoring and threat detection and response capability. But where the unique piece sits here from an MDR service perspective is the ability to look for things even if there's no indicators of compromise for them. And some of those might be delivered to you via care certs to say there's vulnerabilities that we need you to go and look for, and in which case you might go and ask the MDR team to see if there's been any indicators of these being communicated. But you'll notice in these two instances from last year, these were contained in the monthly threat hunting reports. And actually, if I just switch over to the next screen, every month customers receive a threat hunting report to say what we've looked for, even if it doesn't impact them as their organization. This is something that we look for across all of those 20,000 MDR customers that we've got in here, so we can prove or disprove a theory or an exploit from its existence perspective. And actually, the real value for me here is that over last year, for all of our customers combined, we had about 30,000 hours of threat hunting that was being performed for our customers on their behalf. So again, try and translate that back into the value that's delivered. If you were one of those customers where we found something in that wasn't alert driven, there's a huge amount of value there. But equally, it goes back into that virtuous cycle that I mentioned earlier on. We created new detections that every single customer benefited from, 177 of them, and actually 24 new outright protection capabilities that anybody from a Sophos firewall to endpoint customer benefited from moving forwards. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I guess just to really finish off here, guys, just as a bit of a reminder for some of what we do with the MDR piece, it's not all about Sophos. Even though we work very heavily with our own technologies, as you can probably appreciate, we can take response actions on our own firewalls and endpoints. I think where this stands out in the market, and especially for those that are looking at taking on security operation centers, is around the ability to integrate and ingest third-party solutions. So as you can see there, we've got some included and not included tags underneath some of these aspects. All of the endpoint piece that you can see there, regardless of which endpoint vendor you use, we can take that telemetry into our own SOC. And yes, that absolutely does include the MDE Defender piece if you've decided to go down that route. All we do in the endpoint and server space is overlay those endpoints with our own agent so that we can A, get more telemetry, not that we don't trust the Microsoft telemetry, but B, that we can take response actions. We know especially when it comes to the MDE tenant, you guys, just like us, would struggle to do response actions directly through it. So us having our own local response agent on that device means that we can still isolate it ourselves, we can still terminal to it, we can still do the cleanup actions without a dependency on communicating with the SOC or using the tooling that's been put in place there. But you're probably recognizing a lot of vendors there, and I guess if there is any questions on any of those, put them in. But also I'd love to talk to you around how we do handle all the detections and capabilities from these different third-party products. I'm going to focus on the Microsoft one in a second in a bit more detail, but I really just want to bring to the fore that each one of these third-party integrations isn't treated as a supplementary piece to all the Sophos telemetry on the left-hand side. Each one of these is case creating, as we like to call it. So it's a first-class citizen in the SOC. So if you're a Palo Alto customer, your Palo Alto alerts create cases for our human analysts to investigate in the exact same way that a Sophos endpoint or a Sophos firewall would. And actually, that's where we'd flip it on its head. We'd use the Palo data as primary, and we'd supplement it with the additional Sophos telemetry in there to make sure that we've got all the answers to the questions that our analysts might have. So with that being said, a little bit of a focus on the MDR for Microsoft specific tier here. I did say that it isn't all around Sophos telemetry, and I think this is a really big turning point for us in the NHS. So again, appreciate a lot. Everybody has access to the national tenant. Some have taken up on using MDE. Some have decided to stay with their incumbent solution, whether it's Sophos or otherwise. But what we've started to see now is that there's still that need to plug that gap. And so you can see there's an inordinate amount of Sophos interactions with the Microsoft stack, as you can see on the left-hand side. And none of these incur any additional integration or data retention costs. Both tiers of Sophos MDR, whether it's Essentials or whether it's Complete, include those Microsoft integrations. So if a Microsoft Defender endpoint does flag a user attribute modified or a privileged logon attempt here, those will go into the SOC, we'll investigate them. And again, if we need to take response actions, very quick and easy for us to do with our own agent. And even if you want to build out the solution around Microsoft and add all the third-party telemetry pieces on, absolutely easy to do. It's just nice, simple bolt-on integration packs. So if we've got multiple different firewall vendors, it doesn't matter. It's just one firewall integration pack with that MDR for Microsoft package to include all of that telemetry as well. So with that being said, there's one final area that I'd like to just address. And I think this one is particularly useful when we think about healthcare, more so in the secondary and tertiary care piece, when we think about IoT and OT devices, as opposed to just outright Windows and traditional endpoints, as it were. And that's just in and around network detection and response capabilities. So there's a lot of details around this, and I'm not going to focus in on all the different detection engines that you can see on the screen there. But I think for me, the big focus around IoT and OT threats is that they can't get an agent on them. We've got things like CCTV devices, we might have blood pressure monitoring systems, might even have fridges on the network that can't be protected with an agent. And actually, often in the case is the case that we find that they are the ones that go unpatched for the longest period of time, go out of support, and ultimately can be posed as one of the biggest points of vulnerability, as it were. So if you're not familiar with how NDR technology works, this is something that doesn't need to go in and interrupt any flows of network communication or similar. This is just a technique that lives off the network. So a span port off a switch stack or off a core network. So we're thinking span ports, mirror ports, or RSpan if you're putting all of that back to a core switch. And what we can do then is, rather than just relying on all the traffic that's hitting the gateway or communicating with any of the agent protected devices, we've got the ability to look at and truly understand all of the network traffic and behaviors that are coming from all of those devices. And the cool thing for me here is that this works on a learning cycle. So if there is that data exfiltration attempt that's coming from a IoT device, if 12 hours ago it wasn't communicating over a certain port, or if it wasn't doing a certain amount of data flow, and then suddenly we notice that it is increasing in its usage, or it's starting to use a different number of ports, the NDR center is there to pick up those anomalies, feed that back to the SOC for us to investigate and work with you to find out whether that's expected behavior or not. So with that, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to just very much hand you back over to Chris to go through a bit of the Q&A. So thank you very much for your time there. But yeah, Chris, I'll ask you to chime back in and we can work through some of the questions.
Lovely. Thanks, Costa. That was really useful, very insightful as ever. And yeah, some good information there. I liked, particularly like the whole area of how the threats are affecting, you know, potential audience. So how we can mitigate those. So we only have one question, and it's related to Sophos early warning. I don't know whether you can speak to that.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
So just a question about 20 customers that were discovered. Were they alerted?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say yes, although not all of them would have received an outreach phone call, as it were. I haven't got a slide on this to present at this point in time, but there is something in the Sophos Central instance known as the Critical Attack Warning Dashboard. And the idea behind that is that you as a customer would receive, if this is triggered, a email from a different email address. It comes from a Sophos XOps email address. And you would also get a big orange banner in the Sophos Central instance when you log in to say, we think you're under attack, as it were. Please review these machines. And then all of these types of detections are outlaid in what's known as an attack warning dashboard, something you won't see unless you've triggered critical attack warning. In some of these cases, yes, we absolutely did reach out to the customers to confirm whether this is expected activity, whether it was a pen test or similar. And thankfully, none of them turned into anything too bad from what I understand. I've grabbed these stats from the early warning system team, to be fair. But yeah, we did speak to a number of them to be able to just make sure that they were aware of them first and foremost. And we did provide assistance to a couple of them as well.
Okay, great. The answer to the next question, I believe, is now yes, but do we offer MDR as a POC?
Yes, we do. There is always a way of how do we define success criteria for a service. So, you know, full transparency, it's not going to be a case of, hey, here's a license and go and put it everywhere. What we would expect to see is some agreed criteria around sort of red teaming exercises, some pen testing going on. And ultimately, you don't need to tell us when you do that. We would obviously provide the licensing, but we'd work with you to say what you would expect to be a successful POC. So would it be that we performed a threat hunt? Would it be that we performed and picked up on that activity? Would it be that we stopped it in the manner that you expected? We'd thrash that out on a one-by-one basis, but yes, we can definitely POC where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, as a takeaway from today, something we'd be keen to discuss with anybody that's interested in terms of how we do that. I can't see any other questions that have come in while we've been talking. Obviously, if anybody's got any questions they want to ask, then please get back in contact. We will be emailing out a link to the recording of this session. We'll also send out some other information around things like business cases and some other collateral that supports what we've been talking about today. It really just leaves me to say thank you primarily to Chris for his time. Thank you to N3i for affording him that time to join us today. And again, I'm sure if there's any questions for Chris, then please filter them through myself and I can field those. And thank you to Costa for delivering the content and giving us some useful information. Any final closing comments from you two gentlemen?
Just one from me, Chris, just for the wider NHS teams in Sophos, just to be aware of them. I'm very much one of the aligned resources in the public sector and NHS teams, but if you're not familiar with any of these names, Laura McKinley in the north, Dan Goodfellow in the south, Andy Bryan has started to pick up and replace Simon Ellis after he left in the summertime period, so you may have spoken to him already. and Jake Naylor is in the north as well. But otherwise, Mark, myself, Hal that are listed there, we're also escalation points. So if you're not sure who to speak to, obviously all the people there, you guys at ITHealth as well, we can help you with any of those conversations that you want to have. Yeah, likewise for my part, I clearly am kind of vested into the north, but my colleague Andy Sherritt, who most of you will know in the south, is a good point of reference as well. But again, if you've got any questions, please just field them through me. Chris, any final comments or thoughts?
No, thanks for the opportunity to present, Chris. Pleasure,
absolute pleasure. Great. Okay. Well, as I say, when we leave, when we close down the webinar, there will be the exit survey. If you can kindly just put some comments in there. Otherwise, we'll just wish you a good rest of the day and thank you again for joining us. Thanks, gents. See you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.